All right, welcome back to another week of the IOGA podcast. I'm IOGA Executive Director Erik Weiseth.
I'm Jack Hurty, Policy and Communications Director. And today we're going to talk about our lobby day from last week and some State House updates.
Followed up with Jack has an awesome interview with outfitter legend Steve Zettel on the Not in Wilderness Coalition, what it is, why Steve believes it's essential to the future of wilderness, and some things you can walk away to think about. It was a great interview, and you should really enjoy it. So now to get us into some of the updates. First thing was IOGA last week had our annual lobby day down at the Capitol. So lobby day and wild game dinner. During that day, we had somewhere in the mid 30s outfitters and guides go up to the State House. We had at least 24 outfitters and guides with a lot of guides this year, which was awesome. Cooking food down at the kitchen at the Basque Center for 2 days in preparation for feeding over 200 people who came down to the Basque Center. So that included the governor. It also included a bunch of legislators. It included the delegations from our federal representatives and just a whole bunch of other folks for whom we work with on the regular. While we were up at the Capitol, we met with over 40 legislators, the lieutenant governor, and the governor.
Yeah, but it was a really good time. I mean, lobby day is one of, I think, my favorite events of the year. This is my third one. So to kind of see how it goes each year, kind of see the issues coming back year after year. It could be interesting to see how they evolve. You know, we talked about non-resident tag allocation. We talked about public lands. We talked about backcountry flight access at the Boise airport. Erik gave a great presentation for the House Natural Resources Committee, which is where pretty much all of the legislation that affects us goes through. And I think we really impressed upon a lot of legislators, you know, the impact, both economic and otherwise, that outfitting has to the state of Idaho. You know, one funny story from the day when Erik was giving his presentation, the room in the committee room was just packed with outfitters, cowboy hats, you know, beards left and right. And I was standing outside the room because it was so full, and I kind of showed up late from a different meeting, and, you know, standing behind these two guys, and one goes, "Man, there's a lot of cowboy hats inside there." And the other one turns to me, he's like, "Yeah, man, it's outfitter day." So I think that just speaks to kind of the impact that we have on the State House down there. You know, we really are able to have some good conversations with people, and it just really is a strong showing for the industry and a good place to show up and make a difference.
Hell yeah, outfitter day. I love it.
Yeah.
The other thing that, we heard regularly is that our dinner, the outfitter dinner, is the most attended dinner of the legislative season. We are the party that everybody wants to come be a part of, which was great. On to State House updates. So SB 123 was an issue that we found out about last week. A piece of legislation would have required a 30-day notice on all big game season or all season setting proclamations from the Fish and Game Commission. And we talked to a bunch of outfitters and really became concerned that was going to especially mess with the spring big game season setting, potentially push it back in what is already a tight window. We went and talked directly with Senator Foreman about our concerns, and then we testified at the Senate committee hearing on it, and ended up that Senator Foreman actually pulled it back, and it's going to go into the drawer, and I don't think we'll see it again this year. So a good outcome for what was, I think, a bill that has good intentions, but would have been really problematic for the industry.
Great work, Erik, flexing a little muscle on that one. And also kudos to the sponsor for being so willing to work with us. This morning, actually, I was down at the State House again, testifying for Senate Bill 1241, which really what that bill does is it kind of installs legislative protection against any county, city, or local regulation of working animals that would make it difficult or even impossible to own and work with, you know, dogs, horses, mules, etc. It was actually a fairly good turnout at the committee hearing this morning, people on both sides of the issue. I testified to the importance of working animals to the outfitting industry and, you know, the heritage and legacy that those animals have in our community. And I think the committee felt the impact of that. They did pass the bill out with a do pass recommendation. I believe there's going to be some amendments added just to make sure that animal welfare and public health are still things that counties and cities can regulate. But I foresee it passing, becoming law, and making sure that no regulation will impose on, you know, the outfitters' right and necessity of working with animals like that. Another bill we're watching right now is HCR 26, which is about wildlife crossings. This is a bill. Basically, the legislature is just expressing their approval for, the construction of wildlife crossings across busy highways in a community-centered way. Looking at the data, wildlife crossings are one of the cheapest and most effective things we can do, not only for increasing public safety and reducing collisions, but also bolstering our big game populations. Folks are always worried about how the elk are doing, the mule deer are doing, and collisions with cars are a significant source of mortality for them. So it's an easy way to reduce that. This resolution isn't appropriating any money. It's not building any crossings yet, but it's kind of clearing the way for that to happen in the future. And I think telling the state agencies that if that's something they want to pursue, especially if they can go get federal grant money for it, then that they should do it. So we'll keep an eye on this. I think wildlife crossings are something when we get the chance and when they make sense to, we'll be involved and kind of advocate for the community on that one.
Yeah, I thought that was a
Yeah.
really interesting presentation. I think it was Representative Petsky. And really, it's not anybody advocating for anything right now. It doesn't cost the state any money. It's more of a declaration that this is a thing that we should support in the future if the opportunities come up to build.
Exactly. All right. Getting into kind of the thorniest issue at the moment, not just for IOGA, but it seems to be occupying quite a bit of time and energy down at the State House. We have some dueling constitutional amendments, and we'll maybe do a deep dive on these soon, but just wanted to go over them again. First one, we have HJR 8 from Representative Raybould, which is adjusting the mandate for the Idaho Department of Lands and the Land Board to allow them to consider long-term revenues and public access when, plots of public land or state-owned public land are potentially up for sale. It also creates a bucket for new public lands in the event that federal lands are transferred to the state. And there's some nuance there that we'll get into. The other one is SJR 103, which you might be familiar with as the Adams Amendment. This is creating a bucket as well for the potential transfer of future public lands as maybe a backstop to prevent them from being sold off by the state later. Yeah, kind of nuanced pieces of legislation, but Eric, what do you think?
I mean, I think we're going to get into a deeper dive on both of these hopefully next week. For our interview, we'll have a deeper conversation and maybe bring in some other folks who have really been looking into this to give us some more feedback and understanding of what the nuances of them are. But at first glance, a couple things. IOJ has not taken a position on either of these. I suspect at some point we will probably want to. But in a big picture way, I think it's awesome that this is one of the bigger conversations we're having at the State House right now is on what is the best way to keep public land public in the future. I think that's just it's a good place to be. It's a good conversation for us to be having because we could be having, and there's been times in the past where we've been having very different conversations. So I think that is great. I think the Raybould one is really interesting in how it takes on dealing with the threat of IDL land being sold out from under outfitters who operate on it today. But like I said, we will have more on this later. But both the bills were introduced and printed, so you can now look them up. It's HJR 008 and SJR 103. So you can find those on the legislature's website, and we'll also be posting links to both pieces of legislation in next week's newsletter.
Yep. Yeah. I think that's a good summarization of where we're at. On the topic of land transfer, we've been working with some of our kind of NGO partners here in the state, Backcountry Hunters and Anglers, Trout Unlimited, Idaho Wildlife Federation in particular, to put together, we've been mostly advising, but, kind of putting together a report on the economic impact of federal land management in the state of Idaho. So looking at what does the federal government spend on these lands? What is the economic impact of that spending? And what could the potential effects be on the state of Idaho if that land were transferred? So we got a final draft of that. It's still kind of being polished. The marketing folks are taking a look at it, putting our logos on it and everything. But I figured I'd share some of the top line numbers that stood out to me. So first one, federal spending on public lands. So that includes BLM, Forest Service, as well as, I think Park Service a little bit, DOD's got a little bit, the Department of Energy with Idaho National Laboratory. That comes out to about $838 million a year, which is a pretty big chunk of change. That's actually about very similar to the size of the outfitting and guiding industry, for some context. When we're talking about transfer of federal public lands to the state, it's hard to have that conversation without thinking that transfer of lands would probably entail the transfer of funding obligations as well. So to put that $838 million into the context of the state budget is about $5.4 billion a year. So kind of medium case funding shortfall would be about 15% of that general fund revenues. They looked at some upper and lower bound cases. So to be I guess an optimist, I'll give you the lower case, which was about $500 million a year, which is just under 10% of the federal or the state budget for the year. In the context of where we're at right now with the state budget, I mean, that would be devastating. But there's more than just the spending itself. Like there's the economic impact that comes along with that spending because, Forest Service employees in Salmon go to the grocery store, they spend their hard-earned dollars at the grocery store in Salmon, and, that has an impact on the community. So according to this report, they're estimating that a reduction in federal agency dollars would result in a loss of $954 million in gross state product, which is the state version of GDP, right? $140 million reduction in compensation, so people's salaries, and a reduction of about 7,500 jobs. And that includes direct and indirect impacts. So pretty significant reduction in economic impact. Obviously, the state could attempt to step into that gap and, change the management, change state spending. And it's hard to say, without knowing what decisions would be made in the aftermath, what those numbers would actually be. This is just looking at a hard cutoff because that's what we can model right now. Another number I wanted to highlight, just jobs that come out of public lands, federally managed and owned public lands right now, supports about 244,000 jobs across agriculture, forestry, mining, and outdoor rec and tourism, which is about 25% of Idaho's total employment in 2023. So that's a pretty significant impact. And I think there are some that would argue that you could have more jobs, you would have less jobs if those lands were transferred. But, it's not something to be taken lightly. A quarter of the state's employment is highly significant. It's hard to overstate how impactful that is. So just a good reminder that, these are big conversations. These are big numbers we're talking about here. And another reminder of how important public lands in Idaho are. So we'll keep you updated as this report comes out. We'll send out a link with, the newsletter once it's public. Pretty striking, I would say.
Yeah, Jack, I think this is great. It's something that really is going to put, what is sort of a theoretical conversation. Everybody talks about how, maybe we can afford it because we'll allow us to make more money, and maybe we can't afford it because of fire and everything else. But it's all sort of theoretical until somebody does the work. And this is the first report I've seen where the work is actually being done. And so we'll be able to have real conversations based on data. And I'm looking forward to it. Moving on, trying to get our head around what I think is kind of a thorny issue. So the licensing board has licenses for a few spots on the South Fork of the Boise River, but the Forest Service that oversees it doesn't offer permits for that section of river. And we are diving in trying to figure out why, what that backstory is, and everything else. So, dedicated IOGA listeners, some of you have been around this game a little longer than we have. If you have any of that context, if you were around for some of those decisions, or really have a better understanding, we're doing the digging. We're looking for some of that data on the Forest Service side, but some of you probably have that hiding in your head. So if you know anything about that, please give us a call, shoot us an email, Jack or myself. We would love to chat with you just to help put some understanding around this issue as we continue to look into it. On to upcoming IOGA events. So the Thaw, our annual gala, is coming up February 26th. At Jump in Boise from 6 to 10 p.m. It's going to be an awesome event. We're working with the state of Idaho to sponsor it around a 3100 film project they worked on. We're going to be showing pieces of the film. We're going to have incredible trips up for auction. We've got a live auction full of amazing outdoor gear. We got a band coming down. There's going to be dancing and partying and all sorts of fun. There's going to be a rifle raffle, a couple of them. So, in classic IOGA fashion, just like our wild game dinner is the event of the legislative season, I would tend to say this is the fundraising dinner gala party of the year. So tickets, early bird pricing ends on the 15th. You can get them on our website, get a table, get your ticket, come down. It will sell out. And like I said, it's an absolute riot. It's so much fun. And we'd love to see you on the 20th. Next new thing on the calendar is the Salmon chapter meeting. So members of the Salmon chapter up there, IOGA has a chapter up there. They're having their annual meeting on March 17th. So if you're a member of the Salmon chapter, make sure you have that on your calendar. Now to Jack's interview with Steve Zettel on the Not in Wilderness Coalition. Jack, anything you want to prep people for on the interview?
Well, Steve Zettel's an awesome person to talk to. He's always got something good to say. The idea of technology and wilderness is a conversation that we need to have right now before technology, continues to accelerate and we get more and more connectivity into our lives. So I hope everyone takes a listen. If you have anything you want to add, if you want to engage, you've got thoughts, questions, feelings, Non-Wilderness Coalition, they have a website, they've got an Instagram, and they are actively collecting feedback, comments, whatever you got. So please reach out to them and tell them how you feel.
Yeah, awesome. Well, here's the interview.
Steve Zettel, welcome to the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thanks for having me.
Steve, can you give us a little background on who you are, where you're from, what you do?
Yeah. Do you want me to talk to you or the camera?
You can just talk to me.
Okay. Yeah, I'm entering my 50th season, I believe, between guiding and outfitting. Started, oddly enough, in Pennsylvania, but grew up actually outside of Philadelphia, and so a long way from here.
Yeah.
I think it gives me quite the perspective of what's available out here in Idaho, and especially in the wilderness, and more specifically in the Frank. I've got 46 years of outfitting and guiding in the Frank, both on the Middle Fork of the Salmon River and in hunting camp. I'm an outfitter, and we float the Middle Fork of the Salmon, and we have a couple of contiguous hunting areas on the Big Creek in the Frank Church.
Cool. And that's Idaho Wilderness Company.
That is Idaho Wilderness Company. Yes.
Awesome. Well, I've been hearing a lot about this Non-Wilderness Coalition, as they call it. Can you give me a rundown on what that is and what you're trying to achieve there?
Sure. For generations, the backcountry is kind of remained unchanged to protect itself. It was rugged enough, remote enough, and whatnot. And in the not too distant past, we started noticing that, the outside world was able to enter the wilderness in unnatural ways. And obviously, we've always had radio communication and whatnot, but now all of a sudden, we have satellite phones. And more specifically, if you watch the Super Bowl in 2025, you would have saw a T-Mobile commercial that said you could use your smartphone anywhere on the planet with T-Mobile and get service. And that changes everything. And it doesn't change the wilderness geographically, but it certainly changes it philosophically.
Changes that experience, right?
Absolutely. The wilderness experience has never been at more risk than it is right now.
And what values in the wilderness experience do you see yourself as protecting from that intrusion?
I like to say that a good wilderness experience is a life-changing wilderness. If you just flew into the backcountry for a day and went fishing, it's great, right? And that opportunity exists. You're a Middle Fork boatman, so am I. You go down the river for 6 days. You're a rare guest that it didn't change your life. And that sounds hokey, but if you've never been, that may be the way it sounds. But if you've been, you understand that. And that's a culmination of time and separation. Separation from society, separation from your problems, separation from all sorts of things. And if you allow yourself to reconnect at any time during that process, you lose the whole function of that special wilderness experience. And it's so easy to do now.
Mhm.
Everybody's smartphone is also their best camera.
Right.
And that's wonderful, but it's also a detriment because we are just not disciplined enough to not utilize what's at our fingertips. And so, you picture the average group of guests, they're all going to have their smartphone out. They're all taking pictures, and that's wonderful. But it only takes one in the group to go, "Hey, did you hear what happened?"
Right.
And then pretty soon emails, texts, checking on grandma's health. Did the puppies get more, all this stuff. And yes, we still have a great time on the river. Yes. But will it still be that spiritual, that life-changing experience? No. Now, is that important to everybody? I don't know, but there's very few places in the world where you can get that. And so the Not in Wilderness Coalition is, our goal is to protect that any way we can.
Yeah. So to that question of who this might be important to, your generation grew up without smartphones, without satellite phones, I think started relying on the most rudimentary wilderness radio technology. My generation grew up, we are digital natives. We grew up with smartphones in our pockets since we were in middle school. But at the same time, I think the folks that I see in my generation are increasingly fed up with technology and connectivity and the digital age. So I'm curious if you could speak to how you think about, wilderness as a refuge for connectivity and digital intrusions into our lives for different generations, right? Like the newer generations, are they do they have the most to gain from this?
So I'm going to go a little broad on that.
Yeah.
When I was a youngster, let's say less than 10, it was still okay to litter. In fact, it was commonplace. Seems absurd now, right?
Right.
Like we would go to McDonald's and when you were done, it might go out the window, and that was appropriate. I would never think of doing that now, right? That's that even as an adult, and if it never became illegal to litter, you would still gain that perspective,
Mhm.
right? And so as an adult, as a mature adult who's been through the wilderness experience and seen thousands of people experience it, I hate to use the term, but it's almost my moral obligation to force it upon that generation you're talking about. Because if they're not forced to, they may never get the chance to experience it.
Because I don't have that
Right.
other frame of
Right.
reference. Yeah.
And more specifically, you said, why the wilderness? I just don't think those opportunities will ever exist at the mall, on the highway, in town, the state park, you know. So in order to have that experience, there's got to be places that with some controls, some legislation, some whatever, even if it's volunteer, common courtesy, that we allow those things to happen.
Mm.
And the wilderness offers that solitude, remoteness, the ruggedness, and the time constraint. You typically, folks are going in there for 5, 6, 7 days or more. And like I said, it takes time and separation. So I can't think of another place where that opportunity will be available to get away from technology. It's there. We could have technology everywhere, but it's the one place where also technology could be removed without too much difficulty.
Right. So let's talk a bit about that process of removal. And, I think this is something that people might be wondering about is, how does the coalition plan on removing or creating this space for, an absence of technology? Is this through regulation? Is this through kind of peer pressure? What's your theory of change there?
Okay, well, I'll begin by saying that I'm a big advocate that we should all wear a hat that says hypocrite, right? I mean, that's really important
Hmm.
because, my levels of comfort are different than yours, different than anybody else's. And so when we created the Not in Wilderness Coalition, my intent was that it would be the forum for the conversation, not necessarily trying to take any, hard position on anything. I want everybody to come to the table that has a vested interest in wilderness and hear what you have to say. And hopefully through that, we can come up with some compromises that work for everybody. The saying is, that, my rights end where yours begin. And so on our trips, we preach common courtesy. If what you're doing is ruining somebody else's wilderness experience, you should probably quit doing it, right? Because that's what they're there for. So I don't know if that,
Yeah, I think, what I'm hearing is it's less about writing regulations, writing rules to dictate when you can and can't use your cell phone, but it's more about creating like a standard of behavior or an ethic for being in the wilderness that
possibly, I would say that the most important thing that the coalition is doing right now is pushing the buttons, creating the conversation, right? Generating some energy in this direction.
yeah.
Because without it, we don't know where everybody stands. It's amazing to me that once I felt like the Lone Ranger, and once I came out of the wilderness and like stuck a stake in the ground that, we need to do something and I don't know what it is, but I want anybody that has interest in it to join this conversation. I mean, it's growing exponentially like every day.
Yeah.
And it's really cool. And so I think it's really important that the coalition remains in that position, that we are the forum for the debate, right? Not necessarily writing the legislation, right? That will happen generically. If we get enough people and enough stakeholders that are passionate enough, those things will happen because we allowed the forum for it to happen. Does that make sense?
Sure. Absolutely. Yeah. It's a space for us to decide collectively, not you dictating what is or isn't going to happen.
Correct. And it was if I was the dictator, I would be very adamant that like, let's refrain from position other than we do have a position, by the way. And that is that there was an act of Congress in 1964. And that takes a lot to get an act through Congress. And that Congress allowed for wilderness. And in that wilderness, it described some pretty unique qualities that were to be set aside for mankind in perpetuity. And for the last 60 years, that worked pretty well. But those qualities are not gone, but they are very much at risk because of communication technology and the other technologies as well. I mean, we have night skies that are just full of satellites. We've got jet flyovers. We got, some of that stuff might seem like it's way out there to ever, manage or whatever. But is it really? We have the technology to do anything we want to do, if we create enough energy to get it done. And, these wilderness areas, they sound big, but when you look at them on a world globe, they don't take up much. And I always like to say, if you can't get it from all of this globe, what makes you think you get it to those little pinpoint in Idaho, right? So why don't we just leave that little area alone, right? And let's base it off 1964, because there was a lot of compromise that made that happen. And then also 1980, more specifically for the Frank, more compromise was made.
Absolutely.
So rather than try to rewrite all that, let's go with that for now, right? That's the traditional wilderness experience that we're all used to. Let's try to maintain that. And that's, so if there is one position we have, it is to maintain that, not to go out of our way to enhance it, decrease it, move it, the line. And for that matter, not really to step outside wilderness at this point. And that's not, I believe wilderness boundaries mean something. If we were to go broad based, like all backcountry experiences, all national forests, we lose perspective.
Sure.
We have a law that says wilderness is different. And so we say, yes, wilderness boundaries should mean something.
Well, I think there's definitely value in having that exception in your life, right? You have this practice of using technology that can be very consuming. You get notifications, you're constantly, receiving emails and feeling like you need to respond to that, or you're thinking about the news, or even just looking at like Onyx or playing music, things like that. And having that, I think that one unique place where it's like a retreat, or you hear about people like going and doing these silence retreats. I think that's kind of how I think of it in my mind, almost as like, you're going to go do a retreat in the wilderness, reset your mind and your intention and your thoughts, and then return to the modern world with a sense of clarity, maybe, or new purpose, or just a better way of going through the world. Does that kind of fit with what you're saying?
Yeah, it's interesting. We're at a moment in time right now where we have technology has reached a point for the ultimate convenience factor anywhere on the planet where your smartphone works. All the functions can work if you have the right phone. And in a couple of years, everyone's going to have the right phone, right? So you have that. But we also have, doesn't matter what your age is, all you have to do is look at any public policy anymore, school systems, golf tournaments. I mean, everybody's all of a sudden sick of the phones. Even though we're addicted to it, they're starting to see it. So it's kind of funny how they're both reaching that apex at the same time. We've got society that's going, you know what? We're finally kind of sick of this. Even though I'm addicted to it, I'm ready for an intervention. At the same time, in the wilderness, it's the first time it's available to everybody in the wilderness. And so if one wasn't around or the other, it would be maybe a little more difficult. But I think the national mood is, yes, I want a place to get away. And we're saying, well, guess what? Congress allowed for one. But why don't we just work together?
Yeah, I think I was saying yesterday that, I know of a few different accounts on social media that on the one hand have a good following and they're selling products and running a business through social media. And then at the same time, these people are posting about how we should get off of our phones and go into nature and be present and be outside. So I think there really is a tension there within the digital community and within people that are immersed in technology and really a hunger for what you're saying.
I would like to add to that just real quick is that, the scariest technology is the one we don't know about yet.
Sure.
I mean, that's, like we think everybody's got a phone, right? Like we have no idea what's coming next. And, instead of, I would rather see wilderness protected in a broad sense than to sit there and play hockey goalie. This came along, let's stop that. Oh, let's came along, let's think about that, right? Let's determine what qualities are mandatory in wilderness, and then it becomes simple.
Sure.
If this is going to detract from it or it's an enemy of it, it's simple. You just can't have it.
Yeah. I think this kind of conversation is probably what a lot of school districts are wishing they'd had in 2012.
Absolutely.
So I want to ask you, what is your vision for, regulatory agency involvement with this? Because I think a lot of people probably listen to this podcast and say, well, why isn't the Forest Service doing it? Why doesn't the agency kind of step in as the governing body? So how do you think about that?
Well, there's a real-time answer to that, and then there's a broad answer. And I'll give you the real-time answer. At this moment in time, regardless of what your perspective of Doge is, the Forest Service and all government agencies are, to understate it, they're on the defensive.
Sure.
You're not going to see many public employees rear their head and say anything provocative,
Right.
anything new. Everybody's pretty much just hoping the status quo doesn't eliminate their job.
Right.
Regardless how you feel about that, that's the reality. That rings really true, like in the management of the Frank Church, the different district rangers, and then the different national forests, and even the region. They're on survival mode right now, both in management and personally, I believe. So we can't expect them to step up to the plate. And even if we went back 10 years and Doge didn't exist and whatnot, I don't know. I don't know what the sentiment in most national forests, the management of it. I would say you have the leadership, and then you have the minions doing the work, right? But you also have all of those people with their own opinions.
Sure.
Right. And you would assume that most folks working for a managing agency of a national forest or a BLM land or whatever would probably lean towards, let's prevent this technology from ruining the experience. But, whether they're limited in their job place to step up to the plate and that, I don't know. But the reality is they should be. This should be their ball. They should be running this. And until they do or they don't, we're going to.
Right. Yeah. I think a lot of managers want to be pushed in things like these too. They don't want to step out too far in front.
Well, and this is one of the reasons I'm so adamant about not putting a stake in the ground that would alienate anybody from this conversation. If you're a stakeholder in wilderness, right, then we want you part of the coalition. We could disagree in the debate, right? So that when we go to these managing agencies, wherever in the future, look at, we've got broad-based support that something needs to happen. We're trying to figure out what that is, and unofficially, we've already done some pretty cool things. We've got, we kind of motivated some groups to do some pretty cool things as far as, voluntary guidelines, they may, how to treat technology in the wilderness so you don't ruin, just best practices type things. And then unofficially, we've actually gotten feedback from some managing agencies that said, if you write it, we'll support it, sort of informally. How's that?
Yeah.
Which is cool.
Yeah. So 20 years from now, you're looking back on this organization and this mission. What does success look like for you?
Well, 20 years from now, I hope we were done 15 years ago, right? Right. The definition of a coalition is a short-term group of people working in the same direction to accomplish a unified goal, right? We don't want to be another just like wilderness overwatch, keep finger on the pulse. And I'm hoping that's what we are. Success to me is knowing that we finally are defining what wilderness is. More importantly, what the wilderness experience is. And we've made it really simple. That's what we did, Dogfight.
Yeah.
We've made it really simple for the managing agencies to decide to make those what might have been more difficult decisions. They're now simple, right? If this is going to detract from this simple definition of what a wilderness experience should be like, then it's real simple. We're not going to allow it to infuse itself into these wilderness areas around the country, whether that's from the night sky, from wavelengths, from, who knows what, right? Different, and we're not saying that you can't go out there with the latest, greatest, rain gear, and you can't ride a horse with a, plastic saddle. I mean,
Right.
that's not where we're going. And I hope that
Something
everybody
that's
understands.
fundamentally changing the character of the experience.
Right. Something you can't get anywhere else. And now we're ruining it here as well,
So does that look like legislation in your mind?
I would think so, in the long run, well thought, compromised. Yes, I would think so. I just don't see how you avoid it. Like, sure, we could come up with best practices on a float trip or in hunting camp or, at mutual, sites in the wilderness. That's easy. But when I talk about technology, it's not just limited to your sat phone or your cell phone, right? It's all these things. And I think that those things are going to get more and more important, and those are so much bigger than you and I, right?
Right.
So much bigger than the coalition right now. That doesn't mean to say in 4 years from now, the coalition can't approach those kind of things. But the notion of telling commercial airlines you go around instead of over, that seems like crazy, right? But it's, but when you're talking about the next millennia, it's not, right? That's very simple. If you're talking, generation, then those kind of things are probably extremely necessary. Is there going to be more or less flights in the future?
Right.
It's going to be more. If there's more, the wilderness is wild-er-ness, right? It's not wild-less-ness. So it's supposed to get wild. That's what I define. It says wild-er. So it's wild-er-ness. So it's a place that gets wilder. Well, if we let it go the opposite, then it's not wilder. And wild being not, frat party wild, wild is extremely natural settings,
Right.
peaceful, chance for solitude, all that kind of stuff. And so, yes, can we incrementally start eliminating, why do we have to see so many satellites? Why do we have to see, like all this stuff may scare people to talk about, but in futuristic terms, the technology will be there, right? So if that's the direction. So I guess that's a long-winded answer. I would hope that because the wilderness is durable and everything can be reeled back in, I just hope we're going in the right direction 20 years from now.
Right.
Not in, the wrong direction. How's that? Because that's all you can really hope for in life, right?
Right.
That you leave things going in the right direction, not the wrong direction.
Yeah. Great. Well, what's next for the coalition?
Well, as you know, we just a long 48 hours with a dozen folks here, a dozen very well-meaning, kind of our quasi board at this moment. But the next thing is to adopt our new bylaws that we've established, have some meetings, create more an expanded leadership for the coalition, and we're updating our website, our membership requirements. And I would say in the next 2 weeks, we're going to be ready to roll. We're going to be, this being, in case this is dated, we're talking, what are we at, January 11th?
Today is
The 10th?
Yeah.
So it's January 10th, 2025. And I would say that we're going to grow our membership exponentially. We're going to, do all the things, podcasts, and we're going to do more town halls. Our next mission's up in Missoula, but we'll be hitting all the Frank surrounding, cities and towns, and just creating a movement. How's that?
Space for conversation.
Space for conversation.
All right. Well, where can people go to join that conversation?
Real simple, notinwilderness.com. All spelled out, notinwilderness.com.
And Instagram.
That's you, buddy.
Non-Wilderness Coalition on Instagram.
There you go.
Yep.
Yeah.
All right. Well, anything else you want to talk about? Anything I didn't ask you about?
No, I think that's it. I think that we really appreciate the participation from yourself, and I'm sure that we'll be working hand in hand with IOGA. Like you can't imagine we won't be, and that's always a great. So thanks for doing this.
All right. Steve Zettel, thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Thanks so much for joining us. And thanks to Steve for agreeing to the interview. Thanks to all the outfitters and guides in Idaho who are in the field, working hard, sharing our incredible state with people who would otherwise never have the chance to fall in love with it. If you liked this episode, subscribe, tell your outfitter and guide buddies, And most importantly, if you are not a member of IOGA, please consider joining. It is the support of our members that allows us to continue our efforts advocating for the community. We'll see you next week with another update.
See you later.